Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to start off the afternoon session. I'll talk quietly so that you can sleep after this nice lunch. But let me start by saying, in light of the title of my talk, that we live in an age of innovation. In fact, Western civilization for quite some time has adopted the attitude that change leading to progress is valuable and important. The issue is that innovations are unfamiliar and new, and consequently are associated with uncertainties. And these uncertainties create a fundamental dilemma. I'm going to be discussing this innovation dilemma and providing a methodological approach for managing that dilemma in the context of info-gap decision theory, which I will tell you about in due course. So, the outline of my talk is I will first tell you what I mean by an innovation dilemma, and then talk at some length about severe uncertainty, although I think there's a lot of understanding about this, but I want to make the distinction between risk and uncertainty. And then I will talk about uncertainty and optimization and the relation between them, and the conflict between them, and introduce the idea of robust satisficing, and elaborate on that more explicitly, and then discuss an example. I have two examples, but I'm quite sure that I won't get to the second one. So that will be fine. So just to introduce the idea of an innovation dilemma in a very stylized context, the idea is that we have to choose between two options, where one option for which the paradigm is a new and innovative technology, is that we have something that is a bright idea that is very promising, but it has higher uncertainty. This may be a technology for which that's the paradigm, or it may be a concept or a model. Apropos the discussion we had before lunch, we may have a new and sophisticated model for representing climate phenomena, for example. The other option is a standard procedure. Standard operating procedure, a state of the art, something that is less promising than the new and innovative, but also less uncertain. So the dilemma in choosing between these two options derives from the uncertainty that is associated with the higher promise of the innovative option. For example, if we consider automotive steering and collision control, the innovative option is an autonomous sensor-based computer control of your automobile, as opposed to a hand-operated and air-cooled steering device called a steering wheel and a brake. Or in monetary policy, you can have an innovative monetary policy using new devices, new economic interventions, or to quote a former member of the Federal Reserve, Alan Blinder, you can have a little stodginess at the central bank, which is the state of the art. Or in diplomatic issues of peace and war in the Middle East, you could have a bold diplomatic initiative like Sadat's trip to Jerusalem and addressing the Israeli parliament in 1977, or which was definitely an innovative option. Or you could have the state of the art, the ordinary conventional diplomatic military cycle. In all of these, you have the dilemma between the innovative, which is more uncertain, and the state of the art, which doesn't promise to be as good, but is more predictable. In more abstract terms, but without getting philosophical, heaven forbid, one could say that nothing ventured, nothing gained. That's the innovative spirit. But the state of the art would say nothing ventured, nothing lost. So I've told you very briefly and intuitively what I mean by an innovation dilemma. I want to now discuss, at not too great length, the idea of deep uncertainty, severe uncertainty. We're all very uncertain by what severe uncertainty means. And then I'll talk about optimization and satisficing and do some examples. So the distinction that I want to make that's been mentioned several times before is between probabilistic risk and Knightian true uncertainty. There are many, many applications in which we have data that we can use to represent random processes in stochastic models. They're stochastic models that we can have a fundamental stochastic process. We can have historical or actuarial data. We can have quality control data, sociological data. These types of information can provide very useful and meaningful probabilistic models of various sorts for supporting decision making. What is characteristic of all of these examples is what I will refer to as a structured events space. Structured in the sense that it obeys Kolmogorov axioms, for example, or at least the probability distributions to obey those axioms. It's a known event space, and we model it with probability, and we're able to manage the risk. It's still risky, but we're able to manage it in a systematic way. But then comes along this gentleman with the pipe, Mr. Frank Knight, a century ago, essentially, in which he wrote in his book, Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit, the uncertainties which persist are uninsurable because there's no objective measure of the probability. Now, he uses the phrase objective measure. That's not in distinction to subjective measure. He's writing in 1921. I believe that's before the objective-subjective distinction that we're familiar with. He simply means we don't know the probability distribution because it depends on things that haven't happened yet. And in that context, a quote from the physicist John Wheeler is enlightening. Wheeler said, "We live on an island of knowledge, surrounded by a sea of ignorance. As our island of knowledge grows, so does the shoreline of our ignorance." And it is this growing shoreline of our ignorance as our knowledge grows. Those are the non-probabilistic uncertainties that I will be focusing on. And so let me try and describe very briefly the origins of these non-probabilistic uncertainties to try and explain to myself the distinction between these Knightian uncertainty and probabilistic uncertainty. I mentioned to Tony that when I grow up I want to be a Bayesian, but I'm still working on that process. So one of the mechanisms which generates Knightian uncertainty is the mechanism of discovery. We can discover America. We simply didn't know it was there, and it changed our worldview when we found it. We can discover nuclear fission, which had profound implications for history. We can discover Martians. Oh, we haven't discovered Martians yet? Well, imagine how surprised we will be and how it will change our view of the universe when one of those Martians comes walking in. So discovery is one of the categories of mechanisms for generating Knightian uncertainty. The other is invention or innovation, which is related but not quite the same as discovery. We can have an invention, a material invention, like the printing press, which can change the course of history in ways that could not be anticipated, or the mechanical clock, which introduced, as David Landis explains in one of his books, the idea of time discipline that was essential for the Industrial Revolution several centuries afterwards. We can have a conceptual innovation, the idea of ecological responsibility. Ecological responsibility is not implicit in the human genome, I don't think. It's a conceptual innovation that changes how we relate to the world. And we can have social innovation. Here we're in the Republic of France, fifth or some number of republic. Social innovations change how we view ourselves and the world in ways that are not predictable. In fact, it even took a long time for the French Revolution to sort of settle down. Is that the right word? And a third category of mechanisms that's in some sense the most fundamental and elementary is the mechanism of surprise, or more generically asymmetric uncertainty, for which ambush is the paradigmatic example. A competitor's innovation, and this was of course one thing that concerned Frank Knight quite a bit. You're developing a product, but you don't know what products your competitors are developing. There is an asymmetric uncertainty that will lead to a surprise that you're not able to anticipate. There can be natural catastrophes that can be thought of as asymmetric uncertainties, asymmetry between humanity and the creator of the universe. So When will be the next discovery, invention, or surprise? This we don't know, or certainly we don't know what the nature of that innovation or discovery will be. Those are Knightian uncertainties. They are unstructured in the sense that their difference from probabilistic uncertainty is that the event space is unknown. We don't know what is going to be the enlargement of the shoreline of our ignorance. They are indeterminate, and I will return to that concept shortly. There are no laws governing the generation of this new uncertainty, and I will return to that shortly. And they're barely manageable, with the emphasis on the word barely, if that makes sense. Let me very briefly give 3 examples and start using this phrase that I'm fond of, info-gap uncertainty. 3 examples of info-gap uncertainties, Knightian uncertainties. Info-gap theory derives very much, it provides a quantification of Knightian uncertainty. So the first one is from a book by Lewis Carroll, this gentleman on the left. Lewis Carroll, Mr. Dodgson that is, wrote a number of books, one of which is called Pillow Problems, and it's a collection of mathematical riddles, geometrical riddles, and algebraic riddles, and probabilistic riddles. The last chapter in Pillow Problems is called Transcendental Probability. And if you know what transcendental probability is, please explain it to me, because I do not know. There's only one riddle in the last chapter, and it is this. A bag contains 2 counters, as to which nothing is known except that each is either black or white. Ascertain their colors without taking them out of the bag. Okay, no high-tech tricks, no sonic, no monkey business. Well, there are answers at the back of the book, and the answer, as is obvious to everyone here, one is black and one is white. And not only are there answers in the back of the book, there are solutions. And the real riddle here is to find where Monsieur Carroll pulls the wool over your eyes, in proving to you that from the fact that nothing is known except that either is each black or white, how he proves that one is white and one is black. And I'm not going to go through that proof. I will let you download the book. I think it's available on the web. But the info gap here, and what's particularly interesting to me is that about this problem is that it's paradigmatic of many binary decisions in which nothing is known. I don't know whether Mr. Kim in North Korea really wants to start a nuclear war with the United States or not, yes or no, and other binary decisions. Okay, so there's an info gap that faces me. Another one much closer to the hearts of many people here is greenhouse gas emissions that cause temperature rise and economic loss, and we have models, 20,000 models I think we had this morning, as opposed to 8 experts, and certain imbalance there, but okay, that translate greenhouse gas into temperature rise, and then temperature rise into change in GDP. And these models are uncertain and controversial. But from one of the earlier ICPP reports, I don't remember which number, but certainly not 5. I'm older than that. These are 10 models for the climate sensitivity parameter. They're probability distributions. For the climate sensitivity parameter S varying from 1 to 10, and now I'm the policymaker, I've got to decide what to do. Well, 10 experts, 10 is almost 8. What do I do now? So there's an info gap, which one might want to manage. 10 models, not 20,000, but okay. Or the third example that I want to briefly discuss of severe Knightian info gaps is policing, profiling, allocating police resources to profile subpopulations. Forget the constitutional issues. I'm not worried about that. I'm, for the moment, in this example, just worried about effectiveness. So I focus policing resources on problematic subpopulations in the United States. The paradigmatic example is drug trafficking on the southwestern border where they're going to build us a wall. Is that the deal, I think? So when you profile a subgroup, the arrests rise in that subgroup. The trouble is that crime rises in other groups because the other groups recognize that they're not being profiled. And so what actually happens is that the total crime rate rises. Well, everybody's happy. The police are catching more criminals, and the criminals are engaged in more crime. So everybody's happy. The problem, the uncertainty here is, and the difficulty in profiling, resources, allocating resources for profiling, is that there is severe uncertainty in the response functions of these different subgroups. So there's another example of an info gap, an uncertain response function. So to sort of summarize briefly what all this is about, an info gap is the disparity between what one does know and what one needs to know to make a responsible decision, where there are two key ideas here. One is uncertainty, and the second is the consequence of a decision. So it's not uncertainty per se or separated from the decision. It's distinct from probability. We're not talking probabilities, we're talking Knightian uncertainties. And in human affairs, these info gaps arise from what I will refer to momentarily, immediately actually, as Shackle-Popper indeterminism. That is what I promised you just a moment ago. So these two gentlemen, this is Professor Shackle. He was an economist and philosopher at the University of Liverpool. And this gentleman, Mr. Popper, was a professor for most of his life at LSE. They independently and in rather different ways developed a very similar idea, which I will refer to as Shackle-Popper indeterminism. It's based on two prior ideas. One I will call intelligence, where by intelligence what I mean is that what people know influences how they behave. Intelligent behavior is behavior that is driven by what you know. That's what I mean by intelligence in this discussion. The second idea underlying Shackle-Popper indeterminism is the idea of discovery. By definition, discovery will be tomorrow, and it's something that I cannot know today. I cannot know today what will be discovered by tomorrow. That's what we mean by discovery. So putting intelligence, that is intelligent behavior, together with learning or discovery, you come to the idea of indeterminism, that an element of tomorrow's intelligent learning behavior cannot be fully modeled today. Part of tomorrow's behavior will be influenced by discoveries, inventions, surprises tomorrow that I cannot know today. And Shackle-Popper indeterminism fundamentally undermines the Newtonian paradigm that is so successful in physics and physical engineering, which is that there are standard, stationary, stable, universal, discoverable laws of nature. And this is the Kantian positivism. We can learn these stable, universal, discoverable laws of nature, learn them, and then control nature. In a Shackle-Popper open universe, and open universe is Popper's phrase, in Popper's open universe, where you have this intelligent learning discovery, Kantian positivism is limited. And the indeterminism that is inherent in human affairs is unavoidable and fundamentally important in an innovative society. And that's what I'm talking about here. So these info gaps, indeterminisms, are unpredictable and also unavoidable if you are in an open universe and discovering, inventing, innovating. And this is not probability. This is unstructured uncertainty for which we do not even know the event space, let alone probability distributions. So I've told you what I meant by an innovation dilemma. I've told you what I mean by severe uncertainty and info gaps and Shackle-Popper indeterminism. I want to touch on the optimization imperative and the implications for Shackle-Popper indeterminism and this broader sense of uncertainty for decision making, and that will bring me back to the idea of an innovation dilemma. Okay, so uncertainty and the optimization imperative. Doing your best. Doing your best, that's what we're supposed to do, right? And if, Yakov, if you don't do your best, we'll find somebody else who will. Doing your best, but what really does that mean? And as I suggested in a comment yesterday, there are two senses of the word optimization. There is a substantive optimization, an optimization of substantive outcomes, goods that you'll use at the end of the game, and there's procedural optimization. And I'm going to elaborate on that distinction and describe it and manage it with the idea of robust satisficing. So in substantive procedural, substantive outcome optimization, what we usually mean by that is you use your best available models to predict outcomes, and you prioritize those outcomes in terms of their those options in terms of their predicted outcomes, and you select the option whose predicted outcome is best. And that is a legitimate strategy, I think, under risk, under probabilistic risk, where you have what I'm calling structured uncertainty that still might be really tumultuous. In structured probabilistic uncertainty can be a very risky, but we know things about it that I'm referring to as structured uncertainty. And one can make reliable probabilistic assumptions, certainly in deterministic situations, but even in probabilistic situations that are highly uncertain in a probabilistic sense, you can make, and you should make, probabilistic predictions and optimize substantive outcomes. However, in situations of Knightian uncertainty, where we have unstructured uncertainty, where we have Shackel-Popper indeterminisms, and prediction into the future is fundamentally limited by our inability to know what innovations are going to take place tomorrow or in 10 years or in 100 years, and this has been mentioned in various ways in previous talks. In those situations, outcome optimization is not a responsible strategy. That's my claim. It's not a responsible strategy because those predictions are, while they're perhaps the best we've got, they are fundamentally wrong, and they're lacking a fundamental element of the future of humanity, and that is the innovative dimension, the Shackel-Popper indeterminism. So the question then is, how do we manage a situation in which we face Knightian uncertainty, Shackel-Popper indeterminisms, inability to predict the long-range or even short-range impacts of innovations in our individual or collective actions. So let me sort of summarize by asking or stating a number of questions. The most elementary question is, what do we not know? Now, if I ask you what you know, you can tell me. If I ask you what you do not know, that's more difficult, but it's a question. If I refine that question, I can ask what I will refer to as the robustness questions. The first is, what is an essential outcome? What do we need to achieve as a result of our decision? Engineering design, policy, choice of model, whatever it is that we're deciding about right now. What is it that we need to achieve in order to make that decision acceptable? The less politically correct way is to look at the other half of the empty half of the cup. What is the worst outcome that would be okay? That's the same question. And the supplementary robustness question is, how much surprise can we tolerate? How large a Shackel-Popper indeterminism can we tolerate if we do this rather than that, if we accept this model rather than that model, if we use this technology rather than that technology? That's the robustness question. There's also an opportunist question. The opportunist question looks at uncertainty from the complementary point of view. Uncertainty is our friend. Surprises can be beneficial. And we can ask, what would be a windfall outcome, something better than anticipated? Let's think big. Let's think wildest dreams. So now we're looking at uncertainty as not pernicious, but propitious. How do we exploit opportunities is the complementary opportunist question. How much uncertainty do we need in order to facilitate a wonderful outcome. There's the story of the religious Jew standing at the Western Wall praying to the Lord of the heavens to grant him to win the lottery. And so God sends down an angel, says, yes, okay, I'm willing to, but you've got to buy a ticket. So same situation here. How much uncertainty do we need in order to enable a wonderful outcome? And of course, underlying both the opportuneness and the robustness questions is, how do we prioritize decision alternatives? And what are the trade-offs? We'll look briefly at these momentarily. So in a schematic first pass, the robustness question or the robustness answer proceeds as follows. And I'm not going to teach you how to do a robustness analysis. If you want that, buy my book, right? That's, or whatever. So you're going to have three components. You have a model of your system. You have outcome requirements. You have an uncertainty model. That's a special element in infogap theory. You combine those into a robustness function, and the robustness function prioritizes the options. An option which satisfies your performance requirement, which is good enough, that's the satisficing element, and which is most robust to 19 uncertainty, will have the highest priority. The opportunist question or answer is analogous. You have the same components. You have a system model. You have an output aspiration. The performance requirement here was that's the lowest acceptable outcomes we're willing to accept. Here is a wildest dream that would really be wonderful if it happened. And you have an uncertainty model which generates an opportunist function, and that also prioritizes the options. And there can be trade-offs or, interestingly, trade-ons between opportuneness and robustness. That is, their prioritization may be sympathetic or antagonistic. We'll see examples in a moment. So I've told you about these various ideas, and I will now go a little bit deeper into robust satisficing and then do an example. So to reiterate the questions that the robust satisficer has to ask himself. What are our goals? What do we need to achieve as a result of our decisions in order for those decisions to be acceptable? And how much error or surprise or uncertainty can we tolerate? So satisficing, this is the second pillar of infogap decision theory, is achieving critical outcomes. So the two giants on which infogap rests are Knight and Simon, Frank Knight and Herbert Simon. Satisficing is the second central idea in robust satisficing. Achieving central goals, worst acceptable outcome, we explained all that. Robustness is immunity to ignorance. I know that there are going to be innovations. Not only are there things that I, Yakov Ben-Haim, don't know, there are things that I cannot possibly know because they're innovations or inventions or discoveries that are going to happen tomorrow morning or in 10 years. And the robustness is the greatest tolerable error. So the question that I'm asking is an epistemic question. I'm not asking how much do I not know, because that I cannot answer. I'm asking, that would be an ontological question. What is it about the real world that I do not yet know? I can't answer that question. I have to just sit and wait until the inventors and innovators fill in the gaps. But I am able to answer the epistemic question of how much uncertainty can I tolerate. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on how I answer that, but the distinction between the ontological unanswerable question now and the epistemic answerable question now, that's a fundamental distinction here. So I optimize the robustness and satisfice the goals, and that is an optimization. So I'm not against doing your best, but it's not doing your substantive best. It is, as Simon, in a somewhat different context, but not entirely different context, called satisficing. We're going to satisfice substantively and optimize procedurally. The robustness at the end of the game, when things happen, the robustness is no longer there. It's not an attribute that you can take to the grocery store. It is part of the procedure, and it is this procedural optimization vis-a-vis my shackle-popper indeterminism. That's what I'm going to optimize, or try to optimize. Okay, so let's do an example. How much time do I have, boss?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay. That's about half of what I need. That's fine. Okay, so a real stylized example. There'll be an equation or two, but it's just sort of to impress the neighbors. It's not really to do equations. So I'm going to talk about time to recovery after some disruption. This could be a building after an earthquake, or energy distribution network, or microsensor after a shock load, or whatever. And my task is to recover critical functions in specified time. And this is going to be a stylized example. I'm not going to go into detailed modeling here. The challenges are that there are huge uncertainties. I don't know what the event is going to be. You know, you think Fukushima, or think national security, the terrible event yesterday in Manchester, or any number of situations where I don't know what it is, who the actors, what their capabilities, what sort of innovations are going to be involved in this event. So, wait a minute, did I miss something there? No. So, let me formulate this as an innovation dilemma. I am designing my time to recovery system, that is my recovery system, and I have to choose between two alternative designs. One design is state of the art, and I will be labeling that with the index Q equals 0. So state of the art, and the other design, and I have to choose between one of them, is new and innovative. So new and innovative, that's not sodium iodide, that's new and innovative, and its index is Q equals 1. I have to choose between these two, where I have a system model, a time to recovery, TTR. T is a function, and it's the time to recovery. It's a function of which system I'm using, Q, and also the load, abstractly or generically speaking, the load applied to the system, how severe the disruption was. So A is the amplitude, I guess, of the disruption, and T is the time to recovery for that amplitude if I'm using system Q, which is either 0 or 1. And I have two outcome requirements, and I hope you can see them both. But the black one is my satisficing requirement. I require that the time to recovery be no longer than this critical time to recovery. So that if it's a financial system, I need to have it recover within 12 hours, otherwise the economic disruption is too great. Or if it's hospital, I have to within 2 hours, or whatever. So this is my performance requirement on the satisficing concept, where the critical time is perhaps determined rigidly prior to the analysis, or perhaps not. Perhaps it's the client is asking, well, what critical recovery time is realistic to impose? And then I also have an aspiration as opposed to a requirement. This white thing, I hope you can see the white stuff. And so the aspiration is I would like the time to recovery to be less than T wonderful, where T wonderful is less than T critical. So the T critical might be I have to recover within 12 hours. It would be wonderful if we could recover within 2 hours. Okay? So the aspiration is thinking about the propitious side of uncertainty, and I'm going to try and facilitate exploiting opportunities in the opportunist side. And the critical requirement is thinking about the pernicious side of uncertainty. Okay. So the info gaps are two. First of all, I don't know the amplitude of my event, A, where, of course, in any realistic situation, A is much more complicated than simply a parameter, but this is a stylized example. And the other thing is, I do not know the functional shape of this time to recovery function. I don't know the shape of the function. So there's an enormous amount of uncertainty here, but I'm not going to talk about probability in this example at all. In the second example, which I'm not going to get to, I do talk about probability. But, you know, the boss here is not going to let me. Okay, so I have estimates of both A and T of A, so that for the state of the art, this is the amplitude of disruption axis, and this is the estimated, T tilde is estimated time to recovery. The state of the art has greater estimated time to recovery than the new and innovative. 10 minutes. Okay, I think I can do that. No, that's not what I want. So the new and innovative is putatively better. It's predicted to have shorter times to recovery. That's why it's new and innovative. Okay. The new and innovative is predicted to be better than the state of the art, but the trouble is there is uncertainty in this function, and uncertainty in a function is that's a hot potato, because we're not talking about the uncertainty only in a parameter a, but in the shape of the function. So that's an infinite number of numbers if you want. Now, an infogap is the disparity between what we do know about the amplitude and the TTR function and what we need to know in order to make a responsible decision. Choose state of the art or choose innovative. Now, about the load, we have an estimated value, and in a very simple example, we may be uncertain about, we may not know the fractional error of that estimated load. Now, there are many other possibilities. Maybe we have an estimated probability distribution on A. That's fine. We can then, if we know that probability distribution, then we do probability. If the estimated PDF is uncertain, we infogap the PDF. That's not what I'm going to do here, but it's a possibility. The other thing is we have an estimated time to recovery, but we don't know how wrong that estimated function is. Now, there are many types of information we might have about the time to recovery function, but I'm, in this example, going to be considering only a very simple infogap model of uncertainty. And most importantly, the new and innovative option is more uncertain than the state of the art. That's the innovation dilemma. If the new and innovative was less uncertain, there'd be no dilemma. And I'd have finished a long time ago. I'm going to have to finish pretty soon anyway, right? Okay. So here's one of these equations that's just meant to impress the neighbors. I'm showing it because I did mention in connection with, was it Brian's talk yesterday, that this is a family of nested sets of uncertain entities. They are uncertain TTR functions, not PDFs. But the structure of it is quite similar to what David was, Brian. You keep changing your name, you see.
David's my brother.
You see, there you go. And you're probably twins, right? Oh, well. It's one of those infogaps. So I'm not going to belabor the point, but an infogap model of uncertainty is an unbounded family of nested sets of possible realizations. The realizations are amplitude of the event, severity of the event, and the time to recovery function. No known worst case, et cetera, et cetera. No probability, piles and piles of uncertainty. Yep, okay. There are axioms here. I'm not going to worry about the axioms right now. The immunity functions, the robustness, this is also just to impress the neighbors, but one can evaluate, one can answer the epistemic question. You can answer the question, how large a horizon of uncertainty can you tolerate, and your TTR will not violate your performance. That's not answering or asking the ontological question, Yakov, how much do you not know? Nobody knows that yet. We'll only know that tomorrow when it's too late. But it is answering the epistemic question. And similarly for the opportunists, you can answer the question, how much uncertainty do you need in order to enable, not guarantee, but enable a wonderful outcome? And one can answer that question. There are interesting mathematical relations between these two functions. You can see that they have complementary optimizations in them. I'm not going to get into all that. Interesting trade-offs. There are situations where if you enhance robustness, you decrease opportunists, but there are also situations where they go together, but those are beyond my time allotment. But here is now a graph of the robustness functions for the two options. So the horizontal axis is the time, the critical time to recovery, and it's a parameter. Maybe your critical time is 20 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever, and this is the robustness, how much uncertainty you can tolerate. And these are robustness functions for the two design options. And the first thing we see is that they are both monotonic. That monotonicity is expressing a trade-off. As you demand better, I'm supposed to stand over here. as you demand better performance moving left, as you require shorter times to recovery, your robustness goes down. As you demand better performance, as you go from 60 to 40 to 20, the robustness of both options goes down. Now, that's sometimes called the pessimist's theorem, because any pessimist will tell you that if you're more demanding in your requirements, then you're more vulnerable to failure. 5 minutes, okay. So not only is that intuition realized here, it's quantified. So you're able to evaluate how much more vulnerable you are if you increase or make your performance requirement more demanding. The second thing we see is that the robustness curves become zero. They hit the zero axis, the horizontal axis, at two different values. For the new and innovative, they hit the axis at, let's say, TTR of 2, and for the state-of-the-art at 5 hours. Those zeroing values are precisely the best model predictions. The new and innovative is predicted to have a TTR of 2, and the state-of-the-art is predicted to have a TTR of 5. But the zeroing theorem says that those predictions have zero robustness. Best model predictions have zero robustness to uncertainty in those models. And what that means is that prioritization based on the best model predictions is fatuous. And this is the gist of what I was saying before, that outcome optimization, when you're facing severe Knightian info gaps, is not a responsible strategy. Because to say that new and innovative is better than state-of-the-art because new and innovative predicts 2 and state-of-the-art predicts 5, well, those predictions both have zero robustness, and we don't believe the models anyway. What we need to do is climb up the axes, or climb up the curves, until we hit the satisficing requirement, and then choose the option that's more robust at our satisficing requirement. And that's exactly the innovation dilemma. Those curves cross, and so that if our performance requirement, if our performance requirement is rather strict, we're more robust with new and innovative. If our performance requirement is more lax, we're more robust with state-of-the-art. And we have a preference reversal. The innovation dilemma is characterized uniquely by the intersection of the robustness curves. If they don't intersect, there's no dilemma. If they intersect, there's a dilemma. And the resolution of that dilemma is by robust satisficing in this context. The resolution of the dilemma, that is the choice between these two design options, is for the more robust option as evaluated in this procedure. Okay, yes. We also have opportunists. I'm going to maybe just skip it because I really don't have time. It's really nice. It's too bad to skip it, but this mean guy here is sending me nasty looks. So this example has illustrated in a very schematic way a time to recovery of critical functions with parameter and functional uncertainty, severe info gaps, but no probability distributions. Clearly, it could be extended to, or it can be extended, whether it's clear or not, to have probabilistic information, which is either certain or info gap uncertain. I illustrated the innovation dilemma here with the idea of the intersecting robustness curves and talked about trade-off zeroing and robustness. The second example, and I'm just going to tell you what I'm not going to tell you about, is the idea of bringing high-tech devices to a less advanced agricultural environment in which there are many innovation dilemmas. New strains of plants may fail. New technologies may disrupt social structures. This example involves uncertain probability distributions, which are info-gapped. And furthermore, some of the uncertainties, especially regarding social impact, cannot be modeled mathematically. And what this example does, and I'm not going to tell you about it, is apply the info-gap robustness analysis on a qualitative mode by employing conceptual proxies for the idea of robustness. One can do a robustness analysis without doing the math in situations where the math is inaccessible. Let me skip real quick to the last slide. Maybe I'm just tantalizing you, but there's no button here that allows me to skip directly to the end, or at least I don't know where that button is. So I'm not really meaning to. Here we go. Okay, so the last slide is I've told you about the innovation dilemma. I've told you about severe uncertainty, info gaps, Shackle-Popper indeterminisms, robust satisficing, the difference between procedural optimization of the robustness as opposed to substantive optimization of the outcome, arguing that it's procedural optimization and satisficing of outcomes that is appropriate under severe uncertainty. And I've talked about one of my examples. If there are any questions, I'm welcome to try and answer them. And you're also invited to look at infogap.com if you wish. Thank you.
So the critical question for me is, who sets the robustness requirement and how do they set the robustness requirement?
The satisficing requirement.
Well, the robustness requirement, because you want, I mean, so the problem, as I said, is the robustness is in parameter and model space, right? So you've got some sort of some intervals in there, how far you are away from your best. Looking at what happens if you're this far away from your best,
right?
Your best estimate of things.
Yeah.
But since that's not in probability, you don't really have any sense of whether being that far away from the best estimate is something that's probable or not. So it's sort of hard for me to see what I'm holding on to in order to set how far away I ought to look.
Okay. So you never have to say. You never have to say what is the worst case. This is not min-max.
No, I understand that. Yeah.
Yes. So you never have to say how far am I off of my guess. There is a related question, which maybe you intended to, maybe not, which is how much robustness do you need? And that is a question that is sometimes relevant. The prioritization between option A and option B does not require you to answer the question how much robustness you need. If all you want to do is which is more robust, if all you want to do is prioritize your options, then that does not require you to say how much robustness you need or how wrong you are. You never have to answer that question. The question of whether option A is very robust and can be relied on, and we have confidence, to use a four-letter word, that is a judgment that needs to be made sometimes and is a judgment and not trivial. I could go on and on about that, but I won't unless you insist.
Thank you. I'd be curious to hear if this view of satisficing versus opportunist is something that could be applied within Rob's RDM framework, and if so, what would that look like in terms of its operationalization, and if not, how to think about how they're different.
Right. Well, Rob's framework is very close to the robust satisficing, and Rob will certainly say, can answer that question much better than I, and many of the strengths that he brings in terms of computational power and modeling for evaluating the robustness in robust decision making, those same tools can be applied in evaluating opportunists. Because as you recall, the equation for robustness and the equation for opportunities are quite similar. They both involve optimization problems. So if you've got the tools for evaluating the robustness optima, then you've got more or less the same tools for opportunists.
And so is it basically just instead of just having one goal that you are trying to be above, that you kind of have a bonus goal?
No. The two goals are very different. Robustness is saying, Yakov, you lose your job if the climate temperature goes above 1.5 degrees. The opportunist says, Yakov, you'll get a big bonus if the temperature only goes up 1.2. That is, 1.2 is not a requirement, but it's an aspiration. It would really be wonderful. We're not setting it as a formal requirement. Would be a wonderful windfall. So that the semantics of opportunists are very different than the semantics of robustness. And the trade-offs are different. In the trade-off on robustness is, as you become more demanding, you become less robust. The slopes of the opportunist curves are the opposite direction because as you become more aspiring, asking for better and better windfall outcomes, you require more and more uncertainty. So the semantics are different, although the mathematics are quite sort of analogous.
So thank you. That's very interesting. I would like to know how would you manage the possibility to value robustness? I mean, suppose that one of the two technologies is more expensive than the other, so you need to trade off robustness against price, cost.
Right, right.
How would you do that?
Right. Well, in different ways. First of all, you can have multiple performance requirements, and so if you have a budget, you could say you could have a performance requirement that we don't spend more than twice what our budget is, or whatever, you know. That was a joke. So that would be one way. Another way would be to say, well, what is the economic value of a given increment of robustness? Or you could turn it around. Suppose the governor, suppose I think I could squeeze $1 million out of the governor to improve my knowledge, which would enhance my robustness. Well, if there are ways of estimating the robustness premium of an additional $1 million of research, and if the robustness premium is 2% of robustness, that's not worth $1 million, we'll use it for something else. Or the value of information can be assessed in terms of the robustness premium. So those are two possible answers to what I understood your question to be.
Okay, I think we should move on. We've got time for more questions later.
Thank you.